Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, non-binary, distinguished guests, welcome to Ridiculous, the Life of a Clown.
My name is Lorenzo Pisoni, and I am a recovering circus performer and now an actor and director and producer and writer.
So you started off with your family in the Pickle Family Circus. How old were you when you first started performing?
I started performing in 1979, and I was 2 years old. And we were in Alaska at a state fair. And as the story goes, I had an old Bobby May top hat that my father had given me. And I think Jeff Hoyle had cut a bentwood cane to my height. And I was obsessed with Bill Irwin, who was also in the show.
Understandably.
Yeah, and I went out into the ring at intermission, and I did the entire show, and I did all of Bill's material.
That's adorable.
Yeah, I think it was adorable the first time, and then I kept doing it, and it got to be kind of a problem because they were trying to change the set over and do the rigging, and Midway was not having as much business because there was a crazy 2-year-old running around the ring and people weren't leaving to go buy stuff. So that's how it started. So it's been a while.
So I don't remember anything from that age. I don't think I really remember much earlier than like 5 or 6. What are your first memories of performing?
Well, that's the problem, right? Because I feel like I have memories of being out in the ring from that age. I doubt that I do, but there's Terry Laurent is a photographer, and she took all these amazing photos. And I've seen all of these photos, and I've seen footage of it, and I've gotten everyone's stories. So I don't, that thing of like how our brains actually recreate the memory every time. Who knows what we actually have and what we just make up. So that's my first memory. But I remember the first time of improvising on stage, and that was maybe when I was 6, and like being able to like kind of go off script and be okay. And so those memories, those feel more organic and self-generated,
So you started around the age of 2. I understand you signed a contract when you were like 5 to be part of the circus. What is your earliest memory of being a clown and performing on stage?
The irony, I don't want you to feel bamboozled, but like, I never really clowned. Like I was conscripted into it because of my father, and he basically needed a partner, and I was, around. And like I said, like I grew up with Bill and Jeff and my dad, and the first show I ever saw was Dimitri, and I was 2 weeks old. Like that was, this is the world in which I grew up in, and so I can clown. As a verb, I can do that. I can create that. I know what that is. I know structure and whatever. But I retired from circus performing officially in 99. And then it was really in 2009 when I started doing some more clowning kind of in public again, because I was doing a show about my father. Thanks. So, like until then I had done a lot of comedies as an actor, and I always had, like I could fall down and get back up again. But it's a funny thing. And of course, and I wrote stuff, and I helped people, and I directed comedy bits for film and theater and stuff in the interim. But it's a weird I'm in this gray area where people ask me, "Oh, you're a clown," and I'm like, no, that's actually my dad's thing or my sister's thing. It's not really my thing. But I've also kind of made a name for myself at this point about doing physical comedy for people and directing it and writing it. So I don't know what I do, man, to be honest with you. I don't know. I just make it up. I had done circus for 20 years when I decided to stop. And it was phenomenally easy. Uh, I was actually in negotiations with Cirque du Soleil at the time to like re-up my contract. I was working on a show of theirs, and and then a friend from college wrote me asking me if I would come to New York to do a production of Romeo and Juliet for the price of a Metro card, a monthly Metro card. And um, I uh, I thought, well, I mean, I could keep doing what I'm doing, but I was starting to get bored. I was starting to. I just was like, well, I've kind of worked wherever I wanted to work so far, and kind of done all the stuff I wanted to do, and yeah, why not try New York? I mean, how hard can it be? I mean, little did I know. And so yeah, it really hasn't been hard. There are certain things that I miss. Like I miss the feeling of the community. I miss the feeling of uh, leaving the teeter board. I miss there are things that I miss, desperately all the time. Um, but I don't, it was pretty easy for me actually. And also like my sister has her own company. Like it's not like I got out of the world, it's still really much a part of my life. I just don't go on stage, and that's okay. I actually left Cirque du Soleil, and I had 5 days to get across the country with everything I owned at the time to start rehearsal. Uh, and we were actually going into previews like another 5 days later. So I moved to New York, had 5 days to kind of unpack, and then I was on stage again doing Romeo and Juliet. And then, and I had never done classical theater at that point, professionally or otherwise. Um, the director, who was the director of Humor Abuse, actually, this woman, Erica Schmidt, she cut Romeo and Juliet down, first of all, so it was just all the kids killing each other. And then she had this idea of Fortune being personified. And so I was Fortune. And so I had some of the prologue and some of the epilogue and then some of, the minor Capulet or Montague lines here and there, but I was on stage the whole time. So that, Juliet says Romeo says I'm Fortune's fool. And so he's looking at me, and, it was a crazy Lower East Side outdoor production. And, yeah, so that was that first role. Thank God, because I think I had like maybe a dozen lines, and I screwed them all up eventually. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your journey to Cirque du Soleil, away from the pickles, before you became, a full-time actor.
So the pickles really started to shift in 1988. And I can't remember, 1988 or 89. I think it was 88. I had an opportunity to go be in Cirque du Soleil then. And I think after discussing it with my parents, it was, I was on tour alone with the Pickles without my parents at that point. And I think they could handle that, but the idea of going off with Cirque du Soleil at that moment seemed a bit too far. So, but what that did was it unlocked this kind of, there's all this stuff happening outside of the Pickles, because really the Pickles were that was my whole world. I mean, I would go to Ringling every year. My father would have us watch the show 3 times, so we would sit in each ring, so like I knew about that show. And I knew about Vargas, and I knew about Beatty, and I knew about other shows, but I wasn't really interested in that. But Cirque du Soleil, I was super interested in, mostly because the first show that came to the States in '87 had a bunch of Pickles, ex-Pickles in it, in that cast. And actually, funny enough, our 2 shows mirrored each other in Southern California that year. So we were just hanging out the whole time together. Anyway, also right at that time, my sister went to Scuola Dimitri, the Dimitri school in Switzerland, and I went to visit her a few times, and that physical theater world also opened up this whole new kind of environment. And I just started thinking, well, maybe there's some other things I can do. You know, in '87, I saw Polifka do The Queen and the Jester at the Philadelphia Theater Festival, and I was like, what the hell is this? This is the craziest, coolest thing I've ever seen. And it wasn't circus, and it wasn't really theater as I knew it. And it just started to broaden my horizon. So basically, I ended up going to a private high school in San Francisco, but I would work on my days off or my vacations. I ended up doing a few different circuses over like high school and college during my vacations. And then it was at the very end of college that I auditioned for Circus K with my sister and Voki Kalfayan. I don't know if you know who that guy is. And we all got it. And David Shiner was the guy leading the audition. I mean, it was the weirdest incestuous thing ever. Because David and I had dinner the night before, and he kept pouring me wine, saying, "You're gonna need more wine for tomorrow," and it was great. But so, I kept working as a circus performer. I thought I was going to be a circus performer, until after my little stint with Mystere in Las Vegas. So it was really just, so in terms of like, and also I started to kind of realize, oh, what I do is I'm a straight man for clowns. Like, that's what I do. I'm not the funny one. I'm the guy that will just like lop the pitch and the clown can hit it. Like, and it started to make sense, like what my father was actually having me do back when I was a little kid. And it just all started to make sense. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's kind of, I basically began to mature as a person, but also as a performer, to kind of realize there was a world outside of pickles, but also of what I actually had to contribute.
So what's your primary focus right now? What is the main project that you're working on at the moment?
Well, actually, at the moment, I kind of have two separate tracks. I mean, yes, there's the movie, there's the doc that's coming out at the end of this year, we hope. But I'm on the creative team for Disney's Frozen, the Broadway musical. And so I've been hired by Disney to create some of the specialty movement. There's some of the puppetry stuff is a little tricky, and there's some stunt stuff, and there's some magic stuff, and I'm basically a catch-all. And so I just get to kind of pick up the slack. And then there's my acting career, which I'm still doing, and just doing really bad television. It's always the episodic, procedural stuff. And so there's that part. And then, I have a project that I'm working on with this guy, Dan Fogler, which is basically a clown show. It's like I can't get away from it. And so we're slowly working on that. And then I'm hoping to start directing more. And so maybe my sister and I are kind of putting something together that we can put forth into the world. That's more physical theater, kind of straight up physical theater. Yeah.
So you're a gifted physical comedian. You have decades of circus skill under your hat, and you're also pursuing a career as in dramas, in acting, and producing. So where do you want to fall? Do you want to put the circus behind you, or is it still a big part of your toolkit?
No, God. I mean, I would love to be on like a terrible medical drama. It would be just fantastic. But on the other hand, I can't get away from it. It's how I see the world. And so when I create something in my mind, it's always the physical. Like I can't. And also in New York, there aren't that many people. There's a lot of great fight directors. There's a lot of great dancers. There's more and more of these people like Stephen Hoggett, these geniuses like him that have a way of creating physical vocabulary that is not that doesn't appear to be choreographed, or it appears to be pedestrian, but it's very well thought out. But there isn't a lot of people that can teach and design physical comedy, and so I've kind of fallen into that kind of thing. Um, and if you know me or know how to find me, and I'm available, it's like I'm the A team of physical comedy. It's like this strange thing where, because I say no a lot, because I yeah, it's hard, like I feel like these are all, I've learned it or I've stolen it from people, and I gotta really want to pass it on, because then once you pass it on, then it's up to the person who's now just learned it to do what they want to do with it. You know what I mean? Like, it's precious. Yeah, I'm a curator of shtick. That is absolutely what I do. Yeah.
So going through your career as a whole as a clown and an actor, not necessarily anything that you're the most proud of, but what is a role or a project that you are particularly proud of?
I mean, there's humor abuse, which I was very proud of, which is that solo show I did. But solo shows, I'll never do another one because it's really depressing and lonely. Um, there was a production of As You Like It that I did at the Public Theater here in New York. It was 6 people, and we played all the parts, and it was such a fantastic uh, communal effort, and it was well received, and it was fun, and it was, I think, in the right vein of the spirit of the play, and also what Shakespeare was back in the day. That it just, and it was a moment in time, and it'll never be repeated. Yeah, I mean, not that someone else couldn't do it. It's just that, it wasn't videotaped or it wasn't recorded in any way. And so it's this kind of ephemeral, kind of beautiful memory. And I loved that. It was a really special time. So I'm pretty proud of that one.
So in contrast to that, what is one of the weirdest gigs you've ever done?
I did a Terrence McNally play here in New York. That was truly bizarre and 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 difficult to do because the play was difficult. And it was that thing of like, oh my God, I got to do this again. I got to do this how many times? This is hard. It's hard, because it's not that anyone involved wasn't skilled. It just like wasn't hitting the mark. And it was a very tricky thing. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's like all the weird, like little one-off gigs that you do, at I don't know, a benefit performance. You're like, what am I doing? Why am I wearing this unitard? What is going on? Or, things like that. But yeah, no, that was like the one that like people were paying to come see. That was just tricky. Yeah.
Let's jump back in time a little bit, and can you tell us a little bit what it was like growing up in the circus? What it was like being a child growing up in the pickles?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, the pickles that was a very unique thing, and it was a very different time when people would be more than willing to work for $100 a week, and they didn't need insurance, and were willing to do it all, and then sleep in public parks. Like, it was a crazy, weird thing. But what was incredible about that was that it really was a family. It was a family of misfits. It was people that all needed a family. And so as a child, to be surrounded by all these people that loved each other and were passionate about what they were doing, and were constantly kind of forced to be with one another 24/7, 365, because that's what it was. You know, that's an incredible thing to be around all the time, as opposed to now in New York, where it's like, do I want to do this? I can't really afford to do it. It's so expensive to live here. You get really tight with people and then you don't ever see them again. You know, it's so much more. It's a much more selfish world that I live in now than what I lived in then. But I don't know that that has to do with New York versus San Francisco or circus versus acting. I think that's having to do with 1970s, mid 80s, and, aughts and whatever we're in now. It's just, I'm on the subway all the time and no one's talking to one another. No one's looking at one another. They're all on their own device with their earbuds in. And, it's a very isolated kind of world in which we live now. So even when I first moved to New York and like long into the early 2000s, people would talk to each other. People would look at each other. People would be reading books. There was a much more, we were connected in a different way. What's funny is after the election, this past national election, the presidential election, I got on the subway the next day and no one was on their devices and no one was talking to one another either. It was like this shell-shocked, weird, and that was like I remember looking around the subway car thinking, whoa, no one's looking at their phone. That's what just happened. Did all the Apple iPhones and Samsung Galaxies just like stop working? Is that what we're at? Or like what is going on? It was really interesting.
So this is kind of a two-part question. First off, when you're making new work, how do you go about it? How do you go about you're creating new work, a new show or a new role? And secondly, what is your framework for knowing that it's good? I mean, before you get in front of an audience, before you get to test it out, how do you know that the work you're doing is good work?
All right. Well, how do I know if it's good? I don't. I I don't think anyone knows if anything's good. I think all you can do is if it makes you laugh, then you do it. And that was something my dad was always a big proponent of. If you laugh at the idea, then probably someone else will laugh at the idea. The trick, of course, is that what you think, the story you think you're telling versus what you're actually telling, that's where you got to fine tune it, because of course you can feel like it's going gangbusters and then nothing's coming back from the other side of the footlights, and then you have a problem. So that's the skill, right, of figuring out what's being seen versus what you're feeling. So that's that. How I construct something, depending on the project, I will either, if I'm not the director, I will talk with the director and figure out what story they want for any given moment, any bit of business. Like, what is actually the character going through? What needs to be said? Where do they start? Where do they end? Like, character-wise, do they learn something? Or are we illustrating something else about them? That sort of thing. And then from there, I say, okay, well, if that's what the director wants, then I have to honor that and I have to sort that out. I'll draw a lot. I'll do X's and O's like football, but I'll also try to actually storyboard stuff sometimes. And then I get up myself and I'll do it myself in the living room and make fake props out of cardboard, and kind of I have to actually do it in the real world. I have to be physical about it. Otherwise it doesn't work. So yeah. So, and if I'm creating something for myself, again, that's tricky. And I try not to use video. I try not to use a mirror. It doesn't, because then I always feel like I'm editing myself. I just try to get up and keep going and see what it feels like. And honestly, I make sure that I have enough at bats in front of an audience before it has to be done, because no matter how long I've done this, and now I've done it for, close to 39 years, 40 years, of being in front of an audience, I know, like, I can say things to directors like, this will absolutely play, trust me. And I have no idea what I'm talking about. Do you know what I mean? Because I don't. Nobody does. Because it is a matter. It is a matter of inches, a matter of milliseconds, and something will play or not. And anyone who says differently is, selling you something. Yeah.
All right, a similar kind of follow-up question. Due to budgets or logistics or timeline, has there ever been a role or project you really wanted to do that you just haven't gotten to do yet?
Um, well, there was a role that I wanted very badly in a movie that actually never got made. And he was just the quintessential douchebag aerialist. And it was going to be so much fun. And it came down to me and another guy. And the reason the movie didn't get made obviously wasn't because of me, but that sort of role, I've met a lot of these people in my life that I'm always kind of so confused by, because circus is such a supportive, and you need everybody. No one has time for people that kind of discard or treat others badly. There's just no time for it, and it's unsafe. And so when I've met people that are really, really douchey, I'm always like, what? How are you going through this world? This doesn't make any sense to me. It's going to come back. It's not going to treat you well. And so that character, I really wish I could have had a shot at, because it would have been so much fun. It would have been so much fun, because it would have been safe, because it's make believe and all that stuff. Let's see if there's any other things. I also, I honestly, I would love to get back to ringmastering again, but kind of in a slightly, well, now at this age, because now I have a child. And I was hoping to do that this winter, and it just didn't work out because of a whole myriad of reasons. So maybe in the future that will be something that I can do, but there is something about, being now a father and having a chance to be, in a circus that would be super interesting. But I just don't know if it'll ever work out, honestly. It's pretty complicated to be on the road with a small child.
So, what are some of your influences? The media, television, books, films, concerts, stage, that influenced who you became as a performer and how you make the work you make?
Wow. I mean, now I'm showing my age, but now I can't imagine what it's like to create things now with, having access to YouTube and Twitter and Instagram and just seeing the world instantaneously. It must be kind of overwhelming. The way that my sister and I were brought up, we were seeing a lot of theater all the time. And so really it's theater that was the thing. The play's the thing, as it were. And I would, that would be the biggest influence. I mean, of course, circus, because we couldn't ever be within 50 miles of a circus and not go see it. So that was the biggest influence. And that's a really interesting question, because I'm thinking about all the music that was in our house. My father would never he plays a lot of instruments, and he would never put them away in their cases. He would leave them out. So my sister and I could just pick up a piccolo, or pick up a ocarina, or pick up a saxophone, clarinet, whatever. And that actually, that whatever happens in one's brain when one has to start reading music and learning that language certainly influenced my sister and I. So yeah, I think that would be it. Yeah, plays, structure, story, definitely.
So the documentary is a pretty major project that you've been working on. What can you tell us about it?
Well, honestly, it's in the can, and I finally am moving on. But yes, I mean, that's like the major self generated thing that's happening right now. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So it's called Circus Kid. Basically, so I did Humor Abuse, which was this solo show about my impressions about being raised by a clown, by my father. And I did that from 2009 to 2013, 14. And I did it all over the country. And not the whole time. I took breaks because I needed to, mend my body. But I was doing a play in New York before I went to Los Angeles to do Humor Abuse for the last time. I was doing another play in New York, and I was working with Jennifer Westfeld, who's a writer and an actor and a director and producer, and she heard about this show, and she said, I think we should film it. You should have a copy of it because you're not getting any younger. You're not going to be able to do it. And I was like, okay, that sounds interesting. I didn't really understand when Jen Westfeld gets an idea that it would actually happen. But she's this force of nature in the best way. But then she met my father, and my father came to New York to see the play I was doing with her, in which I did a bunch of physical comedy stuff. And she kind of fell in love with him. And my father can be so charming and so kind of, yeah, it's like Gatsby, where you're just like, who is this guy? And she said, we have to make a documentary about this guy. And so basically the documentary is the answer to the play. So if the play was all my point of view and stories that in the way in which I saw them, the documentary, we went around and we interviewed Bill Irwin, and we interviewed Jeff Hoyle, and we interviewed my father and my mother and my sister and a few of the other original Pickles. And I got a bunch of footage together and just piecing together what I think was my father's history. Because my dad, he was an interesting guy. His grandparents really raised him because his parents were so young. And his grandparents were vaudeville performers. And then my father ran away from home when he was 15. And he wanted to be a painter in New York City. And he was doing construction, to kind of make that happen. And he found himself at the Electric Circus, which is this famed nightclub that had circus performers in it. And two of those circus performers were Javi Burgess and Judy Finelli. And my father had lied and said he knew how to run a follow spot. And he saw their juggling act one night and then realized it was lit really poorly because it had no backlight. So he went up there during the day and put backlight on them. And the next day, Javi came up to him, who was only 10 years older than my dad. So my dad was 17 at that point. Javi was 27. And Javi had already kind of innovated all this, ball bounce juggling and was kind of, the man. And Javi came up to my father and was like, who are you? And invited him to his circus workshop out of NYU graduate school. So, my dad has this crazy story where he went from a runaway to now all of a sudden having all these circus skills in a very short amount of time. And so the movie is about that. It's about figuring out, really what those stories are. And also my father kind of had a breakdown in 1987, and he left the circus quickly, or he was asked to leave. It's still unclear. I'm still unclear what the real story is. But when he left, he left me, and he thought I would be better off staying with the circus. And I kind of didn't know what happened to him. And I hadn't really gotten over that. And so it's kind of about figuring out who this man is as opposed to who Lorenzo Pickle, his clown character, is. Because that guy, Lorenzo Pickle, I know. I worked with him for 5 years. I know him really well. I know all his routines. I know all his beats, can mimic him. But my dad, I have kind of no clue. So that's what the movie's about.
So when does it happen?
When does the film come out? Well, hopefully in the winter. I mean, we haven't had an official announcement, so I can't really. I shouldn't say. That would be contractually silly. But yeah, yeah.
So where can people find out information about the movie when it gets released?
Well, we have a website, Circus Kid the movie, circuskidmovie.com. And there's a trailer on there, and there's some info on there. And hopefully there will be like an announcement very soon about when it's going to be released and put out into the wild. Yeah.
How about your two-man show that you're working on with Dan Fogler? When is that going to hit the stage?
Oh boy, that is a good question. Dan Fogler is in these little movies, the Harry Potter spin-offs. So whenever those are done, I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, then. So where can people find you online?
I'm old, man. I'm old. I don't have that stuff. Yeah, honestly, like I don't have that stuff. This has been the problem that I've found with union theaters. I can't take any of my work and put it online. So at the museum, at the Library of Performing Arts at Lincoln Center, there's that As You Like It that I talked about earlier. There's Humor Abuse is there. A bunch of other plays that I've done there are all at the library, but they're not online because of. And I'm totally pro-union, so it's not a slight on that, but it's tricky, that stuff. Yeah, so I don't know. I do have LorenzoPisoni.com, and there's a terrible acting reel on there. Because everyone has to have that. But yeah, and then on my Instagram, which is Lorenzo Pisoni, and Twitter, Lorenzo Pisoni, and all that stuff. I'll be going crazy with that. Yeah.
All right, thank you for being on the show. And this is our last question. If you could tag any other 3 clowns to be on the podcast after you, who would they be?
Voki Kaufman, Spencer Novick. Have you talked to John Gilkey? Yeah, talk to him. I'd be curious what he's got to say. Yeah.
Well, Lorenzo, thank you very, very much for joining us on the show today.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you for joining us today on Ridiculous Life of a Clown. This program, as always, is made possible by your support through our Patreon, which you can find through www.picklewater.com. Also, please join us this coming January 27th, 2018 at 7 p.m. at Stageworks Theater in San Francisco for a huge circus gala featuring clowns, comedians, and burlesque dancers, all in benefit of Planned Parenthood. Hope to see you then. Bye-bye.